it was all mistakes all along, or happenstance or circumstance all along, but I would put myself in a position to succeed and to meet those opportunities. Trying to plan what's going to go wrong, I think, is important, but you're not always able to know what's going to go wrong. You need to have some general plans, but certainly planning and training for that inevitability is an important thing to do. And I think it's often overlooked, or it comes too late, or as the reaction of something that has happened. Flying a person in the live audience, for me, was a rope and a set of pulleys, probably a 3-to-1, maybe a locking device, and I would pull them up by hand because the idea of putting them on an automated winch system was preposterous that it could possibly be safe. And today, a properly designed automated system is by far the safest way to fly a person.
Welcome to the StageLync podcast. Today we're talking with Scott Osgood.
Scott is an acrobat turned acrobatic equipment and rigging system designer for Acrobatic Solutions LLC. He's the brain behind innovative deceleration and winch decoupling systems for live shows and UAVs. His pioneering work earned him the prestigious TIA Award for Technical Innovation. Launching his career at Sarasota Sailor Circus, Scott's global performances and rigging expertise led to significant contributions to top entertainment entities. His designs have been featured in Cirque du Soleil productions and Disney projects. Scott enjoys life's journeys with his family of 5. Hi, Scott. Welcome to the show.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
So nice to have you here. So I always like to start with the origin story, Scott. So tell us how you got into this industry and what drove you into acrobatic design.
I'll try to do the shortest version of the origin story as I can, but it really starts at 6 years old. I'm in a neighborhood with circus performers living in the neighborhood. So I have a flank trapeze act down the street, a high wire act down the street, and my dear friends with their boxing kangaroo and their chimpanzees down the street. And one day, the gentleman doing the boxing kangaroos, Mr. Fawcett, Tony Fawcett, he needs a longe, you would say in French in the circus, or a mechanic in the American circus. And he basically is putting a bar between 2 trees, but he needs somebody to tie it. And I'm the 6-year-old kid that's climbing all the trees in the neighborhood. And he sends me up to tie one side, convinces me to scurry across to the pipe. It's about 20 feet in the air to tie the other side off. And I realized years later, reflecting, the only reason he did that is he wanted it to go faster. But for me, that was my first rigging job in the industry. And the next day, my paycheck for that was, he got the rest of the pieces together for the mechanic. I would step off of a platform onto a mini trampoline and do a somersault into the pile of needles, which was the mat. So that was my first acrobatic training, I would guess, or my first and it influenced me hugely. Fast forward to introduction to the Sailor Circus program. It's a extracurricular activity connected with the school system in Sarasota, Florida. Full-blown circus. At the time, it was a canvas tent that the students would put up, tear down, manage in order to create the infrastructure. And we had opportunities to do all sorts of acrobatics and circus acts. Flying trapeze, which is the one I led myself to, high wire, trampoline, juggling, clowns, all sorts of circus. They even had some animals back then, some horses and some dogs. And there would be, 150 kids from the school system and perform in the Sailor Circus program. So I became a part of that.
That's fun. And how do you go from a extracurricular activity to being a
Okay,
professional.
so that's a fair question, and I did kind of stop because you were asking the origin story to my industry. The sailor circus really isn't set up to put people into the professional industry. But some of us tend to lean in that direction, and I did. The very first year, I finished the season and was offered a job in the theme park in Gurnee, Illinois. Marriott's Great America, it was called back then. It's changed since then. I think the park is still there, to do a high wire act. And I got paid, which was amazing. 15 years old. I had a girlfriend for the summer, which was amazing. For a 15-year-old from high school, and made enough money to buy a motorcycle, which was amazing. And I have to say, the direction that I was heading for my professional career was pretty well set by the end of that summer. I was quite determined to continue on with the circus, and certainly by no. How do I say it? It was all mistakes all along, or happenstance or circumstance all along. But I would put myself in a position to succeed and to meet those opportunities. And from there, finished my high school career with the Sailor Circus program, and from there was offered jobs immediately out into the world doing flying trapeze in the beginning.
Amazing. And I know that we're kind of fast forwarding through your career, but going into acrobatic equipment and acrobatic design, I know a lot of people is such a valuable thing to go from actually performing on apparatus to then designing for it rather than from any other direction, So what was your transition into design? Because I know that Anna and I are quite tech nerds, so we're gonna dig into the design component of your career more than anything else, I think.
Absolutely, and that's the expectation, because that's where I am now and have been for a long time. So, in what I used to lovingly call the real circus, or the traditional circus, the American circus that I grew up in, not large corporations, but small owners, for instance. When you have a circus act, a flying trapeze act, I was talking to Anna earlier about the old man comedy aerial act. You design, build, you write the script, you design and build the act, including the equipment. So all of the equipment that I was working on after I left the Sailor Circus, I would build. I've had a mechanical capacity and understanding for engineering elements, understanding for physics in a very natural way my whole life since I was a little kid. So and a yearning to learn. So my capacity to be able to build this equipment safely through research and through trial and error was a natural pathway. As I continued on, I started building equipment for other acts, as not so much as a business, more of a side hustle. Eventually, Cirque du Soleil called to, based on a resume, an acrobatic resume that I'd sent them years earlier, looking for an acrobatic equipment designer for the Lanuba show. I interviewed for that, turned the job down. Oddly enough, just circumstances weren't right. It was way too quick. The job was on fire. Exactly what? The job was on fire. They had not accepted any of the present. They had a designer in hand, had not accepted any of his designs, and they were really looking for somebody to take over. Eventually ended up as the head rigger on the show during the install, and they went through another designer, and they smoked that guy, let him go, and asked me to finish the job, which I was kind of obliged to at that point. I was already deep into it as their head rigger. So I got a credit for the design and for the head rigger portion, stayed with them for a few years, and kept picking up gigs with Cirque du Soleil, Academy Awards, some television shows that they did, and eventually was asked to join the Z team show in Japan for as their acrobatic equipment designer. That's a fast forward through it. I mean, there's some bits that are in between, but that's a fast forward through an official title as an acrobatic equipment designer.
Amazing. I want you to we want to hold for a second, and for those who are not in the circus realm, because I'm cognizant that a lot of people who are our listeners think are very well versed in theatre, but maybe not circus.
Sure.
So if you were to define what an acrobatic equipment designer would be, what would that definition be?
Well, I would define the responsibilities, which would be everything that's hanging in the air that would be over an audience's member's head, over somebody's on the stage's head, or would be the responsibility of the rigger. So it's acrobatic equipment design and rigging. And really they go hand in hand because the stuff needs to not fall in somebody's head in the first place. It needs to be safe. And then the acrobatic equipment portion would be the acrobats, the actors. Sometimes they're acrobats. Sometimes they're singers. We often have actors who end up taking an acrobatic role, not so much as doing somersaults, but they need to fly through the air. So flying an actor through the air, all of the equipment, all of the infrastructure, the automated pieces, the choices of the hardware. For me, a lesson, thankfully, I didn't have to learn, but learned early, right down to every single nut and bolt in the design falls under the acrobatic equipment designer's responsibility. So short definition would be anything overhead in a theatrical production that involves the actors would be my responsibility. Does that help? Does that answer the question?
Totally.
I think as a short answer, it's a very short and defined, but confined. I don't know, limited. But yes, it answers the question, and personally makes me ask so many more questions. But that kind of makes me think and leads me to ask, I guess, because the way you define it, like the responsibility is huge. And I think I think the industry has evolved so much during the past maybe 20, 30 years.
Absolutely.
From having a kid rig something to complex systems that we use this today.
Yes.
And but at the same time, I feel like it's become so popular that we're going back to the basics kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then everyone thinks they can rig with whatever. So I wonder, what are your thoughts on this evolution and how you've seen the equipment evolve, the industry evolve, the safety parameters evolve? I don't know if it's a very broad question.
No, it's a fair question. So 30, 40, 46 years ago when I started in the Sailor Circus program, for instance, there were things going on that I know now. Oh my gosh, like this is absolutely crazy. Why are we doing this? My flying trapeze experience, my very first trip into what they call the front apron, a safety device, it broke. And it was broke because of very obvious lack of understanding of the capacity of the rope that they were using. Piece of rope, they just made a bad choice and didn't maintain it well. Things like this have been going on for a very long time. They still are. The explosion that you mentioned, the explosion of interest in being an acrobat to having well beyond circus. You have bungee dance. You have studios with tissue acts, lyra acts that are constantly on the social media asking very, very basic questions and exposing the fact that there is so much still remaining misinformation about understanding hardware choices, understanding use and of the equipment and the hardware, and putting themselves in an unknown, dangerous situation. It concerns me. I have I've seen a lot. I guess you have as well. I've seen a lot that, and I tried a lot on the internet that I would like to correct. And I try to weigh in when I can, when I think I can be responsible about it, and to make sure that the information gets across cleanly. But often that's not the case. Often the person who's making the mistake really needs somebody on site to intervene and to show them. Recently, I'm a teacher at heart. When I'm setting up equipment, I usually have other riggers or technicians or even acrobats with me setting up the equipment, doing an install for one of my designs. I'll explain everything as I'm going through it. And one of the statements that I've started to make is when I get the question, is this good or is this safe? And I'll say, well, would you take a picture of this and post it on Facebook and defend it as a standard? And it's kind of a joke, but it's a legitimate standard, because when you do post a picture of something that you've designed, you need to expect to be scrutinized quite brutally. And sometimes from people who have no idea what they're looking at, but also there's a lot of quality experts and expertise that will be looking at your equipment as well. So as a standard for safety, it's probably a valid standard, but it exposes what you're talking about, the concern that of the growth, the explosion of acrobats in the amateur world.
And not even in the amateur world, Scott, if I was to sort of say, I think one of the things that, because it's not just about the acrobatic design component and being able to put that in a show, but it's the day-to-day operations. So competent stage managers, competent automation operators, competent riggers, and the maintenance and long-term
100%.
Safety operations on that. And I think one of the things that, having run long-term circus shows myself, I think it's not a matter of if something happens, it's a matter of when, not because of the acrobatic equipment or something, but a lot of the times the acrobats are doing stuff in the space and there's mistakes made, or machinery might stop in the middle of the air, or performer might make an error, and everybody around that needs to be qualified and know how to deal with those situations in a show running environment. And I find that across the board, accessibility to training and stuff can be variable for people who arrive on site ready to run those shows. Do you agree?
100%. And I think that the unfortunate part about experience is you need to experience the issue in order to have that experience. And because the shows that we're building are exploding, are growing exponentially, the expertise gets spread thin and not always on a show. Trying to plan what's going to go wrong, I think, is important, but you're not always able to know what's going to go wrong. You need to have some general plans, but certainly planning and training for that inevitability is an important thing to do. And I think it's often overlooked, or it comes too late, or as the reaction of something that has happened, an incident that has happened, as opposed to planning for how to do it. There's often some basic plans that are put in place, but the nature of an accident is if you could predict what the accident was going to be, you would have planned for it and kept it from happening. It's very difficult to actually plan for all inevitabilities or probabilities. So having an experienced team to be able to react to that, I think, is really important and difficult to find. I mean, in my position, an acrobatic equipment designer, people that have the kind of experience that are necessary to do this, I'm lucky I evolved into it. I didn't, there isn't a university for this. But we're few and far between. There's not a lot of us. And I know for me, the work is feast and famine. So there's some very good guys out there that have given up and moved on with their life because they couldn't sustain their passion, which is unfortunate, because when you need somebody with that kind of experience, it's good to have them around.
I do all these constraints and all this information, all these ideas we've just shared in the past maybe minute or so, how does that inform your design for acrobatics equipment? Like the evolution of the industry, the evolution of the materials, mechanics, the training of people, the training of acrobats. How does all that fit into your design?
I take all of what's available to me into consideration in the beginning. A piece of equipment that I'm going to design for an individual who's going to tour in a traditional circus is a much different design than I would for a full-blown show that Anna might represent, where you have an automation team and you have a rigging team. And even then, in a high-end production, you might not have the skill set in that part of the world that I'm normally used to. Like I do a lot of, I call it rope rigging. I have a high expectation of my riggers to understand the and handle the equipment, including manually handling some pieces of equipment that is also mixed with an automation system. And I don't always find that skill set. So I need to take that into consideration, that this piece needs to be only manual or this piece needs to only be automated, which often nowadays, because of the evolution of the equipment, is a safer approach. So a trapeze for an individual is simply going to be a trapeze with very, very limited constraints. And a trapeze for a highly automated, highly produced show, we're going to try to fly that thing all around the arena. So the equipment and the expectations are very different. For me, the end result is I need to be able to sleep. Sleeping is important for me. So I try to go through all of the inevitabilities that we talked about an issue happening in the design phase. So I can sleep. So I'm not worried about it.
And now a note from our sponsor. The StageLync podcast is proud to be sponsored by Clearcom. Clearcom is the leader in voice communications for theatre and the performing arts. Call your cues with the simplicity and elegance of Clearcom Intercom solutions. You can find them at clearcom.com. Go check them out. What do you think is there's a lot of very traditional circus disciplines, and then there's people that do variations on those original circus disciplines. Is acrobatic design evolving? And if it is, how is it evolving?
Certainly it is. So we'll go back 46 years, 30 years. Flying a person in the live audience, for me, was a rope and a set of pulleys, probably a 3-to-1, maybe a locking device, and I would pull them up by hand because the idea of putting them on an automated winch system was preposterous that it could possibly be safe. And today, a properly designed automated system is by far the safest way to fly a person versus putting them on the rope with pulling a person. So that advancement has happened very clearly. I was just speaking with, even when I conceded to the automated systems, we used to run fly people for a tissue act, for instance, for a straps act, with a joystick, manually by hand. You would stand there and you would run the joystick and the guy would go up and go down. I saw some problems with this, and we had some incidents with this. So in 2012, the development of, I was acrobatic equipment designer for Zed. I'd just done a year or so before the Academy Awards. We had a problem. We pinged somebody off of the truss in one of the rehearsals. Everybody was okay, didn't get hurt, but the potential was huge. So for the Zed show, suddenly I get to set the parameters, and the parameter I set for flying people was everything needs to be cued. Everything needs to be planned. You push a button, you let the computer decide where they're going, even in complex moves. And maybe you don't push a button at the start of the act and stop. It's just through one move, perhaps up and down, but that still has to be cued. No more automated systems. I got so much resistance from the technicians and from the actors, both. But I stood my ground. I insisted. We went through some extra training, some extra workshops in order to prove that this was viable, and won a lot of converts. The technicians suddenly had a lot less pressure. The acrobats suddenly had a very consistent flight path that they could count on. Once we learned that we could push the button on a music cue that we're both hearing at the same time, visually, we're still doing the check, just like with the joystick, but now it's a button. And the button allows you to go to position A, position B, and land at position C exactly the same way, in the same velocity every single time, was a tremendous enlightenment and increased the capacity of the act while increasing the safety of the act as well.
No, that's true. You've seen an arc that I came in the automated part. I miss those stages.
Yeah. And back in the day, you'd have a group of people, 6 people running back and forth, holding a rope backstage. It was fun.
Actually, no, having said that, I did once way back early in my career, a Russian ice circus came out to Australia, and I worked on that, and they did the old school way of ropes and everything. And that was fascinating to me because I'd never seen that. But then I worked with Cirque, and then it was all automated. But I have seen people with, a few blokes and a rope and making it happen in the old school way. So it's nice to see. So on the flip side of that, having the trajectory, now that we have the winters, now we have the programmation, what's the next step, Scott? Like, what's after this?
Oh Lord. I don't know. I mean, looking at some of the augmented reality that really hasn't caught mainstream yet, but I got pitched. I was developing some equipment for a show, and I got caught up with the director and the scenic designer to watch a pitch for an augmented reality. So the audience wears goggles. They see everything as they do normally, but there's pieces of it that can change digitally, including the audience members making some choices. And you would be sitting next to somebody else in the audience that would make a different choice than you. And you two would see presumably what is being performed live, but you would see 2 different outcomes. It was a bit difficult to comprehend. And I haven't seen it come to fruition in the way that I'm explaining or was presented, but I can see some potential for this. My worry about that scenario is, if you can do this, why even bother go to the theater? Just stay at home and put your goggles on. And that worries me a lot. But the demise to innovation of live entertainment, that discussion has been happening for a very, very long time. And it hasn't happened yet. We're still here doing live entertainment.
Well, and we go back a little bit to the idea of the explosion in the industry, right? So maybe the big corporate or the big entities in the industry will going to go that way, but then we'll still have the little, maybe that will make so that we have even more because there's more exposure, and so there's more people wanting to train and do other things that
I think that's true, and I think that's what the explosion of the neighborhood gym that has put up circus equipment because there's been an interest there and a way to exercise, and a very organic way to exercise. I love the exercise, the physicality of when I was a flying trapeze artist, of what I would get out of that. I never needed to go to a gym. I had 2% body, was strong as a chimpanzee. And doing something interesting. So I understand the drive towards that. And I think you're right that will continue to move forward and continue to expand because of the exposure of these other shows. And having said that, none of those people expect to be in those shows. I mean, some of them try to and strive to, but for the most part, everybody understands that it's just exercise. But honestly, that's where I was in the sailor circus when I first started out. Never expected to be doing anything beyond what we were doing at that moment. So, yes, I think that it will continue to drive that innovation.
When we talk about this explosion, I think, and then it's going to get a little technical, but it's mostly on fixed points, right? And what are the dangers and the considerations if they ever want to go beyond fixed points for all of their training equipment?
For the neighborhood gym? So I get this all the time. And the line that I draw for an automated system usually sends them in another direction, because the line for an automated system includes a sophisticated piece of equipment and a technician that can handle and maintain that piece of equipment. And in my mind, when the transition went from pulling on a rope to an automated system, it included all of those things. And the small neighborhood, even the smaller shows, don't necessarily have a budget to afford that. The pulling on the rope is still viable. And the equipment and the use of equipment and combinations of equipment have evolved to a point where that can still be done safely, and as safely as an automated system. Probably not to the same extent as an automated system. You're not going to get the same result out of it, but you can mimic it, or you can get it close. There's been some devices that have been put out specifically for flying people in a budget that doesn't include an automated system. The 3-to-1 ratio pulling on a rope is still viable. You still need competent people, though. But I think you can still do that in the gym.
And there's such a space for that, right? Because not everybody can afford that level. And I think that's the same thing about accessibility to training for those automated systems. If you're not in a school that can afford that kind of equipment, you're not getting your hands on the desk, or you're not getting your hands into that space to start learning. And that's what I think is, I think this is my personal rant. Automation companies and stuff should get a lot of their equipment into universities that are training for performing arts, if they want people coming out being able to operate them,
100%. And I think that the training, I'm glad you brought that up, because the training of any of it, the automated systems, the kind of rigging design that I do, even acrobatic rigging in general, there's really, I shouldn't say no, there is a lack of formal training in those regards. And a lot of it happens from apprenticeship on a casual level. You get a job and you're a rigger, and you learn to do the acrobatic portion from the guy that's next to you. I'm not sure that's necessarily the best way to do it, but this is the way that it's being done.
It's so true, isn't it? There's not acrobatic rigging 101 that you can take for courses, right? So it's also a combination of skills, right? Because you've got to understand the acrobatic component of what the person needs to do physically. You've got to understand the engineering and construction component of what's going to work dynamically with the performer and the winch. And then you've got to know the technical component, which is the automated side, right? So it's not just a single lane skill set, is it?
No, and physics is involved as well, in understanding the not terribly obvious dynamic loads that are going to be applied. And then just experience and knowledge. A lot of times it's about choices of equipment. And those choices aren't necessarily strength. A high wire design, for instance, would be an example of that, in that in order to get a high wire with a reasonable safety factor, you get a piece of wire rope, and then you pull it to tension. And once you pull it to tension and you approach maybe a 5-to-1 safety factor, which would be low on today's standards, normal for a high wire, the high wire artist complains that it's not quite tight enough. And so your natural reaction is, I will get a slightly larger cable in order to pull it tighter. Not understanding that what he's feeling isn't the tension, he's feeling the frequency of the wire and the movement that is happening under his feet. So you get a larger cable, you pull it tighter, and even though it's tighter than what he felt before, it doesn't feel tight to him. So not understanding the physics of what's going on, the fact that what the high wire artist is actually looking for is a specific kind of frequency, how it's wiggling underneath his feet. I think is something that needs to be taught in a school.
So how do you fix the frequency? I need to know this now.
Okay, so how do you fix the frequency? You
Yeah.
you find. So what I've done, the first high wire I did that I actually did the calculations on was a 2.82 to 1. I know it very specifically because, man, I studied this a lot. And it scared me to death because it's such a low safety factor. It means 2.8 to 1 means that the load applied to the wire on a regular basis is only 2.81 times less than its breaking strength. So it was approaching its breaking strength. Normally, we want a 10 to 1 or a 12 to 1, and even an ANSI standard would be an 8 to 1. So high wire, to get it up to a 5 to 1 was my goal. Was to find a sweet spot. The choosing a very well designed piece of wire rope is important, and wire rope has evolved over the years. So same diameter, same weight, but stronger. And then finding the right balance of diameter to capacity to hold in order to get the frequency high enough. They usually want a high frequency, a very little movement in the high wire, to be satisfactory to the artist at the 5 to 1 tension. And that's what I eventually did. As I got the artists to, I have done quite a few times actually, to reduce the wire rope size and put it at the same tension so that they're feeling that higher frequency. I don't even think the high wire artists often understand that what they're looking for is a frequency, not a tension, not a number on a dynamometer, on a measuring tool. So there you go. That's what I did for this particular. The first time that I ran into this, where I was chasing these numbers, was to communicate with the artist, explain our goals, and then do some trial and error in order to get to a safety factor and a satisfactory tension. As the wire got bigger, it's more weight for him. I don't think they realize also that they're moving the wire around. You're not just balancing yourself. You're moving the wire under your foot as well, even in micro amounts. And having that extra mass makes it more difficult to move around. So smaller wire, less tension, but the same feel.
Nice.
So exciting.
Sorry if I dig a little deep to some of my explanations, but it's kind of the way my mind goes.
No, Anna and I love it. Don't worry.
So what would you say is your favorite thing about your job?
I like the creativity, and that creativity was unlocked when I discovered automated drafting, AutoCAD, automated drafting programs. Previous to that, any of the drawings that I did were by hand. Anybody that knows me knows my handwriting is terrible. My drawing capacity is terrible. But having the automated system to steady my hand or to create the exact curve that I want has been a godsend. It opened up a whole new world for me, which has been a blessing. The curse of the automated system is it gives you unlimited opportunities for possibilities. And the way my mind works, I generally have to explore all of those. So sometimes very, very time consuming because I want to explore every possibility in the space, which often leads to discovery. It's not done without some reward. But for me, the rewarding portion of my career, of my industry, is the creativity and the capacity to design original concepts. It's important for me. I don't do I get calls for a standard flying trapeze rigging that you would set up in a circus, and I hand them to my friends. I try not to do those because I need challenges.
I love that. I love that. And if you could change something about your job or the industry, what would that be?
Oh, that is super easy. Planning ahead. Oh my gosh, there's some shows that do great and they will start early and they will bring somebody like me in early enough to do it. But I've had so many incidences where I show up and there's a problem and like the whole act is evolved except for the safety portion of it. So it's not even the equipment. They just asked me to come for the safety portion of it, but the safety import to do it properly can't even be implemented in the space that you have. We didn't plan ahead. We didn't think about this. We'd been planning and practicing in some other space where it was safe, but now we moved into the theater and we can't implement that anymore. Or the client that calls and they want a custom piece of equipment. I had this happen recently for a live show that's going to go out on tour, and they need it in LA on Thursday, and it's Monday. And it hasn't. I don't have these beautiful custom sway poles, which I love to produce, sitting on the shelf for Thursday. So planning.
Oh my goodness!
Yes. Oh no, those are real. I mean, major production. Thinking about the planning ahead, I think, is an important thing. And some shows do very good and they understand that already from experience, but everybody needs to know that this stuff doesn't just pop off of the hardware store.
I love it.
Not even know that you 3D print them.
No.
Well, not them, things, not apparatus.
No, I actually, the 3D printers, you see them back here. I've incorporated them in, I have a decelerator that you saw in I've incorporated a piece of those into my acrobatic equipment. The 3D printer, not just for acrobatic equipment, but all kinds of pieces. When I'm idle with my acrobatic world, I'm often doing designs for my 3D printer, sometimes just to fix a part at the house. But I really love the 3D printers.
I love that. Scott, thank you so much for joining the StageLync podcast today. It's been such a pleasure to get to know you and hear your story and your work. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate this opportunity and your interest. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.